Today we are looking at the theory of stress and in particular the General Adaptation Syndrome. So this is a theory that was brought around by a stretch researcher known as Hans Selye. I think it's how it's pronounced, in the 1950s. I think it was 1956 when this was brought out. And he basically looked at stress as stress. So emotional stress, physical stress, mental stress, be it financial troubles, big physical stressors in the bodies, relationship struggles, things like that. So basically he packaged stress as it is, which can come in many forms. This was later then adopted by a lot of people in the fitness space, and of course it does play a role there. It makes sense when you bring it over, because as physical exercise is another stress on the body, this too can be broken down into the General Adaptation Syndrome and can be explained through that. But for the sake of this, I'm going to talk about Hans Selye's theory and then adopted a little bit towards training towards the end. So looking into the theory of stress and adaptation. So you're going to see GAS written a lot. That's just me shortening down General Adaptation Syndrome. So what you can see here is, I will move my mouse, there is the normal level of arousal across the center here, as it's broken into three parts or three phases. So the alarm phase, resistance phase, and exhaustion phase. So this y-axis, the one on the left where the normal level of arousal is, this is your stress, so up here. And then the x-axis is time, so that's as time continues. This, be it over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, it's just as time goes on. So first of all, we got the alarm phase, and this can be seen as something that's a big life event or something that's a big stress. And you can see in brackets there, loss of a job, divorce, death, loved one. It's a chronic stress. So that puts you into the alarm phase. And at first the experience is very stressful, but then as time goes on, you learn to deal with it and go into the resistance phase, where one gets used to it. But in this part of the graph, you can see you're in this constant state of resistance phase, and as it continues for a long time, over time, you can end up in the exhaustion phase, where one cannot stay in any longer. And this is where he believed depression and other chronic illnesses came from being in this heightened sense of stress for such a long period of time, above your normal level of arousals and above your tolerance, that eventually you fell down into this area. Again, it will be adapted towards strength training and things like that soon as well. So alarm phase, resistance phase, exhaustion phase. So again, Hans Selye in the 1950s, stress researcher. Just breaking it down before I go into a bit more detail, the alarm phase is just stress exposure, a little bit of fatigue or chronic fatigue. It's resistance phase then, where improvements are made dealing with the stressors. But if this is happening over quite a long period of time, you may go into an exhaustion phase, which is seen as overtraining in modern day slides on the General Adaptation Syndrome. So moving on to the next one. 3 phases explained. We've got the alarm phase. So your stress response system is designed to cope with emergencies or short-term changes, utilizing 2 hormones to release, cortisol and epinephrine. Of course, your adrenaline is going to drive up as well, and there's a lot of other things happening, but I'm just going to pay attention to these 2 hormones. So epinephrine, just the result this has is it increases your heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, strength, etc., all short-term. It's helpful but can be triggered from small things. Then your cortisol. This plays a role in reducing pain, decreasing inflammation following an emergency, and decreases immune response. So it helps regulate your immune system. And this is coming back to that sort of fight or flight, I'm sure, which you've heard of. So a big event goes off, you go into fight or flight. It's just a theory, which would put you into 2 categories, how you react. There's no need to touch on that today, though. We will be touching on that again. Then we're going into resistance phase, which is when you start releasing large quantities of stress hormones over a prolonged time or over a prolonged period, and your blood pressure, heart rate, tension and things like that are always elevated over a long period of time, as we saw on the graph. But this is a place where we can learn to adapt, build and re-establish homeostasis. So homeostasis is your normal sense of being. So where you saw your normal level of arousal or your normal level of stress, the goal is to bring that level up, that you're able to tolerate a little bit more over time. But oftentimes this can lead into the exhaustion phase. So it can no longer cope due to long-term stress. Outcome is usually disease due to long-term effects or illnesses. Depends on individual genetics and susceptibility to the illnesses. So the suppression of the immune system can lead to all sorts of injury, pains, extreme fatigue, and worse illnesses, of course. And this is where we bring in the whole tapering or deloading is vital to avoid overreaching. So this is where it kind of turns to more training than life, I suppose, examples. And this has been adopted and is widely adopted in any strength course you do or any sort of certificate you go for. They're going to talk about GAS model and the supercompensation. So in terms of your training, fitness level, fatigue, training age, genetics, and everything is taken into account. So this is usually explained in terms of being a novice. So newbie comes into the gym, they have their normal level of arousal. All of a sudden they're hit with these new stressors. They dip. That's where you're sore, you're in pain, your body's learning to adapt, and your central nervous system is adapting for the next 24 to 72 hours, usually 48 to 72 hours. Then you start to come up into that resistance phase. You're in the resistance phase, you've recovered, and then it's time to go again. And you see these dips and weaves, and as you and your body learn to adapt, there's less need for that big recovery time between. Where people often sort of go wrong here is they go straight into the alarm phase, and then they don't give themselves that time to get into the resistance phase where they're able to adapt and their body's able to adapt to those new stimuluses, and all of a sudden they stay in the alarm phase, keep digging themselves in there. On the other hand, what you see quite a lot is someone goes into the alarm phase after doing their session, there's a bit of panic, and then they're put off for a while. They come up into the resistance phase, and then they're kind of there for a while. They don't do anything else. It could be a week to 10 days before they go again. And you've kind of left it too long for your body to learn to adapt, because your body wants to be in this certain level of homeostasis. That's why you get into so much muscular pain when you do something new or you begin, because your body's not used to it. It thinks it's bad until you give those small doses here and there, and then your body starts to adapt and realize that this is a good thing and you need it. So we have a recovery phase directly after the alarm phase in order to demonstrate a higher level of adaptation to the stimulus directly after the alarm phase. We have an initial drop in fitness, which is normal. Skipping the recovery phase buries you further. You will not get the supercompensation effect without recovery, so you need to give time for that recovery and phase it in. Leaving it too long can kind of push you back a bit, and it means you would return to a baseline, meaning adaptation or change won't happen, especially if you're training for a while or if you're training and then you leave it for a week or leave it for another while, and then you're kind of jumping in and out of training. You're never fully adapting. You're going through the same process all the time, where you go into these extreme DOMS or delayed onset muscle soreness or extreme fatigue for a day or two, and then you come out and you do nothing for another week or more, and then you go in again and out again and in again, and your body's not adapting. It's just always coming back to that normal level of homeostasis. So we must change or increase stress to adapt even further, otherwise we will see diminishing returns. So supercompensation, you can see here you have your level of fitness in the center. You exercise, your fitness drops, and then as you recover above regular level of fitness, you hit that supercompensation line. So this is when the body overreaches during recovery. So as the red line comes above fitness there, you can see you are in a level of recovery. So this is when the body overreaches during the recovery period in response to given stress and increases above an initial level of performance. Effective programming should have this built into it, as too much stress can cause detraining. Supercompensation increases your baseline performance over time. So again, bearing in mind that these small doses to stress are good for you as long as you're not keeping them high all the time, or you're not letting yourself recover every time. That is how you will end up going into the exhaustion phase. So this is just an introduction to the General Adaptation Syndrome. There's a lot more we can touch on, but it's very basic. We can see that periodization and planning is important in order to avoid the exhaustion phase or stay out of it. A lot of us would know what the exhaustion phase feels like. It's quite heavy. It's when you've been training quite a while and your level of performance has dipped. You feel overtrained, even though you know you're capable of going a gear higher. You can't. You just don't have it in you. Your body's aching. Your body's not doing what it wants, and because you haven't accounted for the resistance phase, you haven't accounted for the goal of supercompensation, you'll find yourself really dug in a hole in the exhaustion phase, and you'll need lots of time to get out. So again, that resistance phase is probably the most important and most ignored, as people either train too much in a small block, not letting themselves get to that recovery phase and supercompensate, and then others leave it too long that they're just bouncing between alarm and resistance phase. So that's it. That's everything for this slide. It'll be something I'll be touching on again. Supercompensation will be a slide on its own, and I hope to do it with some demo programming on the screen as well, just to give you a bit more of a roundup. And that is everything.